Yeah, so we got to assign another current event here. I haven't done so in the other classes, but we'll get it figured out. So I guess we're at Hannah. Right? Yeah. So Hannah, will have you for a current event. I'll put it up on the board now. Don't forget. All right. So Bellringer for today. There we go. Who was Clever Hollins? Why was this case study so significant? There we go. Why was this case study so significant? The horse. I thought it was an interesting story. Interesting study. What do you think, Michaela? Good stuff there. Fooling everybody. Making some money off people. All right, so let's go over it. Clever Hans. Why was he so important? What was the story behind this here? Sarah, what do you got?
Well, I said that it was a horse whose owner claimed that he knew mathematics.
Von Austin, right?
Hmm?
Von Austin, I think that was a horse owner. Okay.
And the case was significant. It displayed that even though the horse couldn't do mathematics, that animals have the mental capacity to react to, I guess, the emotions or expressions of individuals around them.
Yeah. I think he did like through facial cues, or I think he maybe did a movement with a hat, something like that. I think he maybe did something with his eyebrows or his face or a hat. Yeah, good job. So this kind of showed that, you know what, even though horses can't actually do mathematics and math problems, that maybe they can be conditioned to memorize certain cues, and I guess it would be like a stimulus in a way to answer certain questions, to understand certain concepts, I guess. So although they don't know mathematics, well, who is it? Funkst. I think it was Funkst who pushed his theory and his idea to try to prove that Clever Hans actually couldn't do math. Yeah, so I thought it was interesting, and talk about hypothesis in your reading, and describe that a little bit and how we can resemble that to this case study. All right, so All right, let's move on to the reading. Let's go over that real quick. Good work on the Bellringer. We'll go over that, and then we'll move on today. Emily Rosa. Instructions, there we go. Number 1, how did Mr. Von Austin test his hypothesis? How did he do so? How did he do so? Campbell, what do you got for 1?
I said that he tested his hypothesis by trying to teach the horse, by showing him an object and saying the number out loud, and then but eventually mastered.
Yeah, good job. So he was pretty much just lifting his foot for, I guess he would just maybe, tilt his hat. Let's just say he was conditioning his horse to, whenever he tilted his hat, let's say he did it once, he'd go over and lift the horse's leg up once. Let's say he wanted him to answer with 2. He'd tilt his hat twice, lift his foot twice, and then he'd give him food, right? So in a way, he was giving him some sort of reinforcement then too. It's like a positive reinforcement with food. Show, hey, if you continue to do this, if you follow what I'm saying or what I'm showing, then you're going to be rewarded with a source of food. Good job. 2, what errors did Von Austin make while testing his hypothesis? What do you have here for that? Sarah, what do you got for 2?
I said he taught the horse how to associate certain actions and signals from others, and that taught the horse how to react, how he expected him to, not actually how to comprehend mathematics.
Yeah, good job. So it's like, hey, the only way that Clever Hans could answer these questions if the practitioner, I guess you could say the questioner, Von Austin, was present, if he was right there showing him how to answer these questions and how to pick up his feet, I guess. So if we remove Von Austin, what happens? Can Clever Hans answer the mathematic problems? No, he can't. Right? No, he can't. Good. 3, if Funks had not come along and found the truth, how could we discover today how Hans answered these questions? What do you have, Michaela, for 3?
Just said that they could maybe test it with questions, maybe without.
Yeah, good job. So one of the biggest things that Funks came out, he's like, you know what? If we remove Von Austin, obviously then Clever Hans can't answer the questions. If we put blinders on Clever Hans, then if he can't obviously see Von Austin, then he can't answer the questions. Also, if we just answer, or if we ask a question that Von Austin doesn't know the answer to, then that kind of disproves that Clever Hans can actually do math. I think that was kind of funny too. It's like, oh, we'll just crush him with one of these questions that he can't answer, and I'll just prove it too that Clever Hans can't actually do mathematics. And with Funks, what else do you have here for 3? Campbell, what do you got for 3? How else could we maybe?
I said try to get on a different horse.
Oh.
Try to see experiment to see if you get the same results.
Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. So try it onto another horse. Maybe see if we can condition a horse the same way as Clever Hans. And we can go through the test as well. Hannah, what do you have for 3? Same thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question.
What's up?
Can you see mine on Google Classroom? I have it done, but when I open it into the Google Doc, it's there. But when it's on Classroom, there's nothing there for it.
Okay, I'll check then. All right. I'll check it out then after class if that's okay. All right, cool. All right, is there any questions on that? I thought it was an interesting case study. What do you think? I thought it was pretty neat with Clever Hans and how he could do math and how he was pretty much swindling all these people in Europe. It's like, oh, I got this horse that can do math. You should see it. It's pretty cool. And he would pretty much just use it as a form of entertainment, make some money off of it. Think about it, early 1900s, some of these people didn't have an education. So if they're just kind of walking around, it's like, oh, the horse is smarter than you, kind of making fun of the guy and making fun of some of these people. And I don't know. I thought that was interesting, especially during the times. It's like, oh, how can we maybe try to disprove that Clever Hans is actually doing math? It's kind of hard to do. But we know that we can figure it out in today's world. All right, good. How about I give you, I don't know, a couple minutes to do some vocab? Does that work? I know it's a longer list. Let you guys work on vocab so you don't have to do it for homework or anything like that. And then we'll move on today with Emily Rosa and kind of how that fits in with this scientific method, which we're going to be talking about. All right, so I'll give you 3 to 4 minutes. How about that? And Hannah, I'll check on your assignment. Okay? Yeah, I can't see it, Hannah. It's not popping up for me. Hmm. I'll go. I have a recorder right now.
Oh, you're recording.
Okay.
You're good. You're recording.
Yeah, we're good. I'll come up then.
Okay.
All right, so I think that's enough time here. I think that's enough time. All right, so we're going to use these case studies. I'm going to describe Emily Rosa's here soon. And then obviously Clever Hans, we went over already. But I'm going to use this to the scientific method and kind of roll through it with these case studies. And we'll analyze the hypothesis of each one and understand that and move on to the controlled test, how they're going to try to test and understand through the experimentation how it can maybe prove our hypothesis. And then for Emily Rosa's example and her study, and same thing with Clever Hans. All right, so we already know with Hans, okay, with his secret, we know that it was conditioning. Okay, we know that Clever Hans, because of Von Austin and his visual cues, his facial cues, whatever it might be, that would trigger Hans to lift his foot and answer the question by tapping his foot, okay, his hoof. And we know with Funk's then he kind of debunked that idea that he actually could do math, because we're just going to remove Von Austin from his presence. We're just going to maybe ask a mathematical equation or a problem that Clever Hans or Von Austin can't answer. Okay. All right, so real quick, Emily Rosa. You guys ever hear of this experiment? No, it's pretty interesting. So this is like a fourth grader. So back in the 90s. She's actually around my age. And she comes up with this idea, this hypothesis that these therapeutic touch practitioners, that, you know what, it's false. It's almost like you could say a pseudoscience in a way. And do you guys know what therapeutic touch practitioner is? Yes, no, maybe so. Camel, no. Sarah, do you know? So a therapeutic touch practitioner is that they have the ability to sense and feel, I guess say pain, or maybe they can help people with disabilities or ailing problems, someone that might be going through a disease, and they can feel their energy field. Okay, they can use this as a way of feeling their magnetic field that's radiating off their body. Okay, so in many cases, people go to therapeutic touch practitioners to help them and alleviate problems or stress that at the time people maybe don't have medication for. Maybe they don't have the solution for. For example, maybe someone that has, let's say, cancer. Okay, maybe someone that has a disease or a sickness, a virus that there's no medication for. And this is really the only way that people can maybe just feel optimistic about their situation, is going to see these therapeutic touch practitioners. Okay, so it's interesting and in some ways kind of funny how these people perform their occupation, perform their tasks, but they kind of hover over people's body. Okay, they're pulling out the bad energy from their body, and they're just waving it off. Okay, I'll show a video here soon at the end of class of how these people do it, and you're going to watch and you're like, oh, that's not going to do anything. That can't be proven to be helpful or beneficial. But for many people, they think that, you know what, this is the only way. Okay, there's no solution to this, so at least I'm trying something. At least I'm trying to feel optimistic about my certain situation. Does that make sense? Okay, you might see it on TV shows or movies or something like that. But for Emily Rosa, she wanted to try to disprove it. It's like, oh, they actually can't detect your magnetic field. They can't detect this force, right? Oh, now we're going to throw Star Wars in here. This force that's radiating off your body. So she had a test of, let's say 10 therapeutic touch practitioners. They had them come in. And she just said, you know what, if I test 10 of these people, they can't detect the magnetic field if I hover over their left or right hand more than 50%. So she's saying it's really only a 50-50 shot, which we'll talk about, but she's trying to disprove this idea that therapeutic touch actually works. So she has these therapeutic touch practitioners come in. She has a cardboard piece right in front of the table. Let's say the practitioner would sit across from me. Let's say I'm Emily Rosa. So she had two openings at the bottom where they would stick their hands through. Okay, so they would stick their hands through, and she would just hover over either the left or the right hand and say, hey, which hand am I hovering over top of? because you can detect this magnetic field, because you can detect this force radiating off the body, you should be able to guess if I'm over the left or right hand. So you guys can imagine that maybe. It's kind of sort of. Yeah. So she does this by randomization too, of what side or what hand she's going to hover over top of by a flip of a coin. So heads, she'll be like, all right, I'm going to hover over the left hand. Tails, I'm going to hover over the right hand. And her hypothesis was that these therapeutic touch practitioners can't detect over 50%, right? That they can't come close to 50%. And she goes through the experiment, and she actually shows that her hypothesis is correct. That these therapeutic touch practitioners cannot detect the energy field coming off the body, which in some cases kind of ruins everybody's job, right? Because they're on TV, they're on this documentary of how they're disproven, how their job is almost kind of left out. How it's not. I guess you could say scientifically proven. So it's interesting. It's funny, kind of like a fourth grader does this, and some of these therapeutic touch practitioners like, I don't believe it. Right? This study's false. Like, this study doesn't make any sense. All right, this is something that's trying to challenge my career path, right, my occupation. All right, but with the scientific method, we already went through that in the first chapter, right? We went through how, the process of the scientific method, and all the steps. So don't forget it. That's definitely going to come up maybe on a quiz or a test that you'll have to remember, okay? All right, so with that, psychology's main goal is try to formulate a theory, try to come up with a solution, come up with a summary of facts proven by data, okay? Proven by a case study, proven by an experiment, okay? And that is the goal. Try to develop an explanation of, a behavior, a mental problem, okay? The way we do that is through coming up with a theory. We all know, going through a scientific method, there's many steps to doing that and try to prove this theory. Okay, we have to formulate a hypothesis. We need to have some sort of prediction. We need to have, we need to go through the experiment. Okay, we need to duplicate the study then before we can actually publish the results. And there's many different steps, like I talked about in the first chapter, that you'll need to remember and know. But the main goal is to come up with this theory. So explanation based on integrated principles that organizes observations and predicts behaviors or events. The way to do that is through experimentation, through the scientific method. Oh, remember the 4 goals of psych, right? 4 goals of psych kind of follows that scientific method as well, and explains how these theories come about. You guys remember the 4 goals? Kind of, sort of, maybe. Sarah, do you remember them?
Describe, explain, and try. And the last one is influence.
Yeah, there's one right after explanation. It's prediction, right? There you go. Good. Hey, that was pretty good. Pretty good. All right, you guys good with that? All right, so before we get to this theory, though, we need to have some sort of prediction, right? We need to have some sort of question that needs to be answered. And that's where we come up with a hypothesis, right? So a good theory organizes a range of self-reports and observations. So that's the first thing we need to do. We need to gather data, okay? And that falls under description, right? So again, this is kind of a review of what we talked about first chapter, but it's important that we know this before we move on. So description, we need to gather observations. We need to try to gather behaviors and observable behaviors and describe them. Okay, write them down, jot them down, so that we can maybe come up with an experiment to maybe solve these behaviors or help benefit a certain, maybe a disability, right? So a good theory leads to a clear hypothesis or a prediction. So after we gather up all this observational data, we can maybe come up and formulate a theory. We can come up with a hypothesis, a prediction of what might happen if we run through the experiment, if we run through this this case study, right? Well, if we want to run through the experimentation. So a hypothesis is formed. A prediction is then stated. And also, once you're done with this scientific method, once you publish your results, once everything's proven, and after you replicate the study, then this will obviously promote more research based off your study. Okay, maybe there's a variable we can include that could either find the results quicker or see a benefit quicker, faster, more efficiently. And that's really the whole goal of psychology and studying sciences and understanding the experimentation and scientific method. How can we make things more efficient? How can we make things less, I guess, say, painful or time consuming? Is coming up with more solutions, coming up with more studies to make sure that we are benefiting these needs and try to help some of these problems. All right, so 5-step scientific method here. So number 1, we're developing a hypothesis. So a statement predicting the outcome of a scientific study or describing the relationship among variables in a study. All right, so number 1, we come up with a hypothesis. We come up with this prediction. So it's always an if-then statement. There's really no other way we can formulate a hypothesis if we don't have an if-then statement. So real quick, a hypothesis, I guess you could say in here. If we take notes in class, if we study, right, then we will have a better exam score. We will have a better grade within the class. Okay, so a lot of times it's an if-then statement. You always see that with a hypothesis. So an if-then statement. All right, so with this hypothesis, we need to make sure that we have all our T's crossed and our I's are, we dot our I's. We need to make sure that we can have testable hypothesis. We can run through this experiment. We can run through this experiment and we can test our results. We can examine our results and make sure that if it is falsifiable, we can include it and we can make sure that we can, when we replicate the study, we can find these confounding variables. We can solve the issue so that our experiment runs the course. And if not, we might have to formulate a new hypothesis, right? We can't just run into these conspiracy theories and not go through the scientific method and not go through experimentation. Okay, we just can't, throw out a statement or a theory without going through that scientific method, without going through experimentation to prove our results, to find these variables that help benefit our hypothesis. I always like that picture. It's a conspiracy. Any more today with news you hear, it's like, oh, it's conspiracy. Right? I think that's kind of funny. All right, so a theory cannot be considered scientific if it does not admit the possibility of being shown false, right? So that shows that we need to go through this scientific method. We can't just rely on hindsight bias once we finally go through this experimentation, right? Priming also, right? Priming can be used to help benefit and see our results, see our hypothesis. In some cases, maybe we should try to eliminate priming, but in many cases, we can maybe have to include it. All right, so operational definition. So operational definition is a specific description of the concepts involving the conditions of the scientific study. So in simpler terms, it's just the definition of the variables. It's a definition of the measurables that we were trying to see. How we're going to try to measure our study, how we're trying to maybe isolate one of these variables to help predict our study and prove our hypothesis. So operational definition is really just really describing our variables and describing our study and explaining our hypothesis in terms that are relatable. So we'll talk about independent variable, dependent variable, okay, and that will overall help with our operational definition and our understanding of it when we get towards that a little bit more. Our operational definition is really just how we describe our hypothesis, how we describe our variables that we're going to be including into our study. And really, it's intended to just eliminate bias, right? Okay, we want to try to eliminate any type of bias and make sure that we're not falling into that, I guess you could say, trap in a way. So examples of operational definitions. Okay, so I usually have this as an activity with a partner. You just come up with some of these operational definitions for tall, old, happiness, intelligent, popularity, good music. All right, so tall, how do we try to measure tall? What do we do with that? How do we measure that? Through feet, inches, right? Okay, it might be meters, it might be yards. Okay, depending on what game you're involved with football, it's like, oh, how do we measure distances, things like that. Old, just plain simple, age. Happiness, or in many cases, old might be maturity level. It might be, just understanding of concepts. Okay, it's depending on what you define as old. Okay, there's many different, I guess, say, explanations to these terms. Happiness, I guess, say, are just how we are around other people, our mood, our mindset. Okay, our expressions, right? Intelligence, okay, through an IQ test, maybe. There's a lot of different scenarios and cases where we might be street smarts and book smarts, common sense smart. Okay, it depends how you describe it. See what I'm getting at, guys? So there's a lot of different explanations of how we can measure certain things, and with our operational definitions, we need to make sure that they apply to our study. Okay, we need to make sure that it's just not too broad, that we have the ability to explain in detail and in depth our variables and how we're going to measure them. Does that make sense? All right, cool. All right, so real quick, hypothesis with Emily Rosa's experiment. So I talked about this a little bit already, but a therapeutic touch practitioner cannot see which their hands I'm hovering over. They will not be able to identify the presence of my hand at any higher rate than 50%. So there's a picture of her kind of hovering over that therapeutic touch practitioner's hand, the cardboard piece in front of, obviously, the practitioner and Emily Rosa. And then she uses randomization, which we'll talk about through a flip of a coin. All right, then over here with Clever Hans, his hypothesis, with Funk's, I guess it would be, if Clever Hans cannot see the trainer, he will not be able to successfully do math or spell simple words. Okay. So Funk's hypothesis, again, you can always see the hypothesis as an if-then statement, okay, and how we can try to predict these outcomes. All right, so I'll show you Emily Rosa's experiment real quick. I think we'll have enough time, and I think you'll enjoy it. And I've kind of just set the groundwork of, how we're moving through this scientific method together and using these two case studies to explain it. You guys good with that? Is it all right if I close out of here? Okay.